even though it's just us because we are recording.
Yes, we are. The Public Integrity Standing Subcommittee is called to order for September 26, 2019. Are there any public comments?
I don't have anything prepared because I've been busy working for other matters that you will be seeing on your agenda the last few days. The only 2 points that I would mention is the audio, video, and audio recording was a recommendation of our committee way back when, so I do encourage you to move forward in that. And the other point, and I think I made it last time, among our other recommendations for the standing committees, but particularly for this one, is to try to have a regular meeting. And the only reason for that, and I realize things come up, is that, and Anthony, is what you have to put on the notice, but the public comment is it's limited to matters on the agenda. And if it's a regular meeting, like at council, of course, there can be anything within the jurisdiction. So one of our recommendations, if it's possible, would that each standing committee have a quarterly meeting and have a set time for that, so that everybody can know that, okay, fine, on the second Thursday of the second month of the quarter, that's when it is. And I once again, I understand that things come up and these are more flexible, but the advantage of that is that people can put it on their calendar, and if they have something to say, they can say it. And I realize also that you're exceedingly flexible about these things, so notwithstanding what's written on the agenda, I think the policy is certainly to encourage anyone to comment on anything within the agenda.
Okay. And we're going to treat this very informally, so
yes.
Just for the record, David, please feel welcome to offer comment throughout the course of the meeting. To go right to your idea of standing committees having standardized, I think that is a good idea. But is that something that needs to go to the full council for us to consider that? And can we consider it in this meeting?
You could probably consider it under update on the agenda item number 2, which is the update, yes.
All right.
We can go to agenda item 2 then. It's a
start
perfect
right
segue. And I would agree. I think it's a really good idea to get set times for this. And the ones we do, like affordable housing and homelessness, where we do quarterly meetings, we've had to move it once or twice, but we know with enough time to give notice, but it does let everyone know. And we should always add a broad public comment at the end, so people can talk about anything within the scope, the jurisdiction of the subcommittee, I think. Is that the better way to do it, or?
If the city council wants to direct, or the subcommittee wants us to have a general public comment, even on special meetings, we can do that.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to do for all the standing subcommittees.
Many public agencies do that for special meetings. They don't follow the strict requirements of the Brown Act. They are more generous.
Yeah, so I think, and put that at the end, that way the people who are here for the business that's on the agenda can speak at the beginning, and we make sure we get that, but let's have it on anything that's within our subject matter jurisdiction.
So from a process standpoint, should we bring this to full council that we're going to be doing this and get full council to agree, or can we perhaps jumpstart the process by coming up with a set of recommended dates for the quarterly meetings and present both the concept and a proposed schedule to council?
So I think it might make sense to do that after the new council is in, because people, once we have the assignments done, people know what subcommittees they're on and when they're available. For example, people who work during the day can't meet like you and I can during the day.
Right.
So maybe we do it then.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And if we need to bring this as an agenda item then as well, that's fine.
I think if you want it applicable to all subcommittees, you want to bring it back to
Yes,
the council. If you want each subcommittee to make their own rules, you leave it to the subcommittees. But if you want it across the board,
Yeah, I
probably
think we want to
best
make
bring
them.
it back.
We want to make them for them, for all of them.
Then
Yeah.
bring it
And it was a
as an
recommendation.
agenda item so
Yeah.
that we can get the discussion out
Yes.
within this council,
Right.
alerting everyone, including the candidates for council, that when you sign up for a subcommittee, beginning in December, January, when we do that, that we will also be establishing what the quarterly meeting dates are going to be.
Yeah, or maybe it's just a report out. Is that easier, the
could
agenda item? We can just report out that we're
report
going to be
out?
doing that.
Sure.
Either in December or January, when we
Okay.
do the assignments as well.
Okay. Moving on from that, can we get an update on 2A, the whistleblower hotline?
Yes, so after the last subcommittee meeting, our office worked with IT to make sure that the phone number and the emails are going to the city attorney's office. We also changed the voicemail message so that it indicates that if the call is about the city attorney's office, that they can call the city manager's office. Since that time, we've received 2 calls. One was a hang-up, and the other one was a question about their water heater, and so we referred them to the appropriate department, and so that's all we have.
Great,
Very good.
thank you.
2B, update on video and audio recording of standing subcommittee meetings.
So I know that IT is fully aware of this new requirement, and when the meetings are being held in this room or in the council chambers, they're being video recorded. And when they're off-site, then we're doing an audio recording. And the departments are checking out the device from me, returning it so that I can upload the audio file to YouTube and also retain it in our vault.
Terrific,
Okay, perfect.
thank you.
2C, business disclosure forms.
Yes, so I think that this is fairly topical as we've recently received a request from a potential vendor with the city who wishes to either not complete the entire disclosure form with the natural persons and the family trust that owns the corporate entity, or possibly provide the form just to city council members. I think the committee will recall at the last subcommittee meeting we discussed a possible interpretation of our ordinance that the disclosure forms are or can be provided to the city council, but may not necessarily be a public document. And I've got an email from the attorney from this entity, if you'd like to take a look at it. It's a vendor for certain police software services that, while I wouldn't say it's a sole source, that I understand from the police department that this vendor provides fairly unique services. There are multiple layers of corporate entities ultimately owned by 2 family trusts, and the main individual who is behind those family trusts apparently is a fairly private person, and because of the security nature of the services that are provided, as well as, I guess, his background, he was, I guess, threatened and suffered some anti-Semitic bullying in his younger years. He would prefer not to provide his personal information or the family trust information. And so I know this subcommittee and the council has previously directed that these be taken kind of on a case-by-case basis in terms of how much information is shared and with whom. And so we wanted to bring it back to the subcommittee and find out if there's been any change in that direction, or if you'd want to make any recommendation to the council about it.
So let me ask a question. So is there a way the information can be shared confidentially with you and or the 700 filers who would be involved in approving something?
I think so. I think certainly with our the interpretation of our ordinance that it could be shared with the council, yes, that could be done.
I'm appreciative of the fact that we've got someone who is had anti-Semitic bullying, so I want to make an exception where we can. I would like to test this out, see how it works, and then make a decision going forward as to whether we continue this. I'm a little concerned that it's very easy for someone to claim that I've been bullied, and so if we find we've opened a door that we did not want to open, then let's come back and revisit this. But to take this as a one-off and try to deal with it in a confidential manner seems appropriate.
Okay, so the form would be completed fully, but it would be shared just with the council members? Okay.
So Chris, how would we do that?
Well, we would get it from the vendor with the understanding that it's confidential. There are some exceptions under the Public Records Act, whereby if the public interest in non-disclosure outweighs the interest in disclosure, that can be withheld under
So
the
that
Public
would be
Records Act.
triggered based on, like, say, the person's request.
Correct. Somebody
Okay.
would have to request it.
And then how do you give it to council? Because it's not a closed session item, so how do
We
you?
just share it with them. We'd transmit it to
On
them.
the
either-
dais before we,
Presumably before, that way they have a chance to look at it before the agenda item comes.
and then we take the form back. I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics to keep
Right.
this.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about, are we creating an exception and the basis is an experience when he was much younger, not related to this firm, where we're not sharing something with the public?
And what I would say is part of that, our position up to this point, and this is a subcommittee, is if they weren't able to give it to us, we just wouldn't take it to council. So that's sort of where I am now, and that's why we want a little direction from the
Yeah.
subcommittee on this one.
I'm trying to figure out how to accommodate someone, but I
Right.
am concerned
Yeah.
about process.
So,
So I could recommend, I mean, on this kind of, this is a software program, I don't know that it's only offered by this company. We could relay back to the vendor that this is our policy and thank you, but we just won't be able to do business with you then, and that may or may not
right.
make them
I mean-
change their
I
position.
mean, part of it for me is this happened, there was an experience, but the person is listed as one of the top wealthiest people in the Los Angeles Business Journal. So they're not secret, right? If people want to bully this person, if that's their concern, they're not going to do it because we entered into an agreement for software from a company that they own. And I mean, it just doesn't, there are going to be times, right? The person's in a witness protection program. I mean, I can envision they need to be really strong examples, and I'm not, other than he prefers that people don't know that he's the person who owns the business that's going to get money from the city. Seems anyone can make that argument. And it's not that he's so private he's not listed in the Los Angeles Business Journal as one of the top wealthiest people. So I don't see where, that seems a lot more public than some form in a contract that's going to sit in a box somewhere. Or scanned in online, I'm sure now. But, so my gut is we keep to the policy unless there's, someone's in a real unique situation. Is that where you are?
I can go with that.
Okay. All right.
All right. So, update on noticing tenants.
Happy to report that the planning department is successful in getting us labels that contain both homeowners and tenants. And also to update you that we are translating all of our public hearing notices and also special program flyers, particularly for the library, into Spanish. And so all of those notices are being mailed and posted online and in our posting boards, both in English and Spanish, and being published in the newspaper in English and Spanish.
Yay.
Thank you.
Yes.
That is good. Thank
Great.
you. Number 3, review of resolution 21691 adopted by City Council July 26, 2006, ticket distribution policy.
Yes, so the city council previously adopted a resolution that includes a ticket distribution policy under the FPPC regulations. If a city properly adopts a ticket distribution policy, then tickets that are provided to the city as an entity, as opposed to individual public officials, if they're provided to the city and the city distributes those tickets and passes in accordance with the policy, and proper reporting is done, then those tickets and passes are not considered gifts to the public officials, whether they're elected, appointed, or employees. That was implemented probably 8 or 9 years ago by the FPPC. More recently, in May of 2019, the FPPC adopted they updated their policy or their regulation. And so I've drafted an updated policy that tracks the new regulation. A couple of key elements of the updated regulation and the policy. It requires the form to be put up on the city's website, and an email link to the city's website to be provided to the FPPC. It allows the city manager to select himself or herself to receive the tickets and passes. The previous regulation did not necessarily allow that.
On that one, so does it allow the city manager to be able to go to those events?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It changed the definition of the value of the ticket from the face value to the fair value, because sometimes the face value of a ticket may not be what the value is on the open market. So say an event is scheduled and the face value is $100, but on the fair market it's worth $150. We would need to put the fair market value on the form. Again, it's still not going to be a gift to the public official, but for purposes of reporting, you'd need to put the fair value on there.
And how do you determine what fair value is?
You'd need to see what people are paying for it, whether that's StubHub or what you're hearing. It's admittedly not as bright line as it used to be. The FPPC is not always as bright line as we would like it to be, unfortunately.
Yes. Given if you go on StubHub, you can have way below and way above for the same event, depending on what someone's willing to sell.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. That seems problematic to me.
But not our choice.
Yeah.
One of the other revisions that it makes is that if the basis for attending an event is to inspect a facility, which some passes are arguably used for instance, sometimes there are tours of the state water project. I don't know if you've done those, but a number of water districts and water purveyors provide public agencies with tours of the state water project to inspect those facilities. The new requirement is you need to provide a written report back to the council after that, similar to what we do for AB 1234 reports. So those are some of the updates. I tried to get you this policy before today's meeting, but I wasn't able to. If it's the committee's recommendation, then we'll bring forward this policy to the city council.
I'd like to have a chance to read it before we bring it, but
Can we give you that individually?
Yeah.
Separately? Okay.
Okay.
We'll do that.
5H, the disproportionate use of tickets and passes distributed pursuant to this policy is prohibited. What's disproportionate use?
Again, the FPPC regulation does not define what disproportionate use is, and quite honestly, I don't know if I've ever seen an FPPC enforcement action on that. My office gets monthly updates from the FPPC on enforcement actions. I've never seen an enforcement action. The idea here is that when the city gets passes or tickets, we don't want them always going to just council members. Instead, the best way to distribute it in the way we do it is we send out an email to all city employees, which I believe council members also get, and it's first come, first serve. And I think that's the best way of ensuring that it doesn't disproportionately end up in the hands of elected officials and department heads.
All right. Thanks for doing this.
And I think related is contingency funds.
Yes. So I did some research. At the last subcommittee meeting, the subcommittee asked that we look at what some other cities are doing. Currently, it's my understanding that we don't really have any sort of written policy or guidelines. I found 2 other cities. Well, Anthony helped me find one city. I found the other. The city of South Pasadena has a policy for these types of contingency funds, which I'll share with you. And the city of Indian Wells has one. You'll notice that in both of these policies, there's a process whereby a certain amount is allocated in the budget for each council member, usually an equal amount. And the council members requesting authority to spend the contingency amount for a particular use will submit that to the city and put it on a staff report for a consent calendar item that goes to the city council prior to the expenditure, and the council then blesses it for the use. The benefit of this is you get a city council acting on the item, and with the city council acting on the item, you're entitled to kind of a presumption that there's a public use. Courts have said that in questions of whether there's a public use or a gift of public funds, if there's a legislative determination that it's a public purpose, you've got that benefit, as opposed to just having council members ask for and use the funds for various uses. That would be my recommendation. I know it's a little bit more burdensome in terms of having to submit in advance and put it on the agenda, but I think from a legal perspective, it's a safer approach.
I like the idea of any use of contingency funds being going to the full council, because it provides a paper trail and a public awareness of how funds have been used. And one of the things I would suggest is that we have something that's a regular feature in consent that would define what use has been made of those funds during a particular time period.
One twist, not to cut off the other committee member, but one twist that Indian Wells has is they can have 2 steps. One is for annual events that they know that council members will be going to, for instance, the League of California Cities or new council member orientations. They will annually list those in advance. That way council members don't have to submit those as they come up throughout the year. And then it's more the ad hoc thing. And the council could also list various organizations. So if you want to go to a particular event, that would be blessed by the council for any council members who want to go to events that the Living Desert's going to have a fundraiser this year. You can kind of pre-bless those.
So
What I would like it to be something where we send to council, this is what has happened, but to have to get permission in advance for every expenditure, I think would just be a very cumbersome process. You don't always know in time to get it on an agenda.
Could
Yeah.
go.
No, I was going to just think. I think frequently it is. So if we get the information from staff when the invitations come in, and we say yes, they can make sure it gets on the next consent calendar. I was thinking the same thing. There will be times where, for whatever reason, it doesn't get to us, or the organization didn't send it in time. And so could there be, again, it's an exception, so it wouldn't be a legislative action. In those situations, it can get approved by the city manager and be reported and accepted by the council.
You could.
You want to minimize those? Absolutely.
It would be best to minimize those, and what I've discovered is obviously during the summer months, that becomes more of an issue if there aren't council meetings for a month and a half or
Right.
2. We just want to be aware that if a council member spends money to go to an event and the council later says no, then that council member may be out the price of the ticket or the event.
Well, could I ask, so you're talking about for every expenditure a council member makes out of what's their contingency fund?
Yes.
So why wouldn't it, because it seems it would serve this public purpose, is the transparency of the expenditure. So they could all be reported to council after. So there's not pre-approval, it's out. Every expenditure is then, after it's done, it goes to the next council meeting. So what would be?
You could do that, as I just mentioned, though. The issue then is if the council says no, then the.
Well, the council would not be, it'd be there for the public to see. They wouldn't be an approval, it would be there for the public to see.
What he's suggesting is, and maybe we have much stronger criteria about what they can be used for, than just they can be used. I mean, is it limited to events? Is it limited to events in Palm Springs? You know, sort of, do we want to have stronger criteria on, without having had time, obviously, to read this sitting here, but where we can do something that way, I think is what you're suggesting.
If there's a presumption based on the guidelines that it's legal, if we would see something that might be questionable, that would raise a flag. But the presumption is it's legal, and if on the rare occasion that it goes to council and it's determined by everyone that, geez, that wasn't, then the council member potentially would have to reimburse.
Yeah, I don't think we would be entitled to as strong of a presumption if there were a challenge that it was a public use, but I think it would at least be a colorable or defensible position to take.
I mean, I'm fine with the way you're proposing it, as long as we have that exception, right, in cases where the information came too late or didn't get on a consent calendar.
I think you're always in a situation where if ultimately council concludes, the majority, that this was an inappropriate expenditure, that council member is going to have to reimburse the city for what that cost was. And it seems to me that should be a part of the policy, that we make it very clear up front that if this is found not to have been an appropriate expenditure, you are responsible for reimbursing the city. And
so I'm hearing two slightly different things.
Yeah.
One is pre-approval or pre-blessing, and one is potential for post.
And
post-hoc.
the reason I think pre-blessing is better is your point from a legal perspective. That's the right way to do it.
And I'm good with pre-approval where it is practical.
Yeah.
So if I could, it's never going to be practical. So you're saying that the law requires that?
I'm saying we'd be in a much better legal position if there were a challenge on a public use.
So few cities, though, do pre-approve. I presume the majority of cities don't.
I don't know of a lot of cities who have contingency funds like this. The ones I found have these policies where there's a pre-approval.
I mean, it is part of the guidelines. The interesting thing is this. I mean, we could list, we have a good idea of the kinds of the events that come up during the year. And so they're like on the approved list.
But let's think about, so one, we could do the events we know of on a pre-approved list, right? That would apply to any council member, right? So if someone goes or doesn't go.
Right.
So that will take care of most of it. Most of the other ones, we're getting with enough time that, you know, when we get it and someone says yes, it just goes on that report that you, instead of doing it after, you're doing it before. But we have an exception where it can be done after. Obviously, there's some risk for the council member if it doesn't fit the guidelines. But it's almost always the same events, right? I think so. I think that's. I'd rather do it legally, as legally sound way, with a way if something comes in late, and do the pre-approval once a year for the events we know are every year.
So the pre-approval, if I'm understanding, you do the pre-approval. So basically, it's on a pre-approval basis, but at the beginning of the year, you're on the pre-approved list. So those are good. It's anything that's not on the list that either we take it to council before it happens, or it's at their council member's risk.
Right. And this is, and the contingency funds, just so I'm clear, are limited to attending events.
Well,
Or are we
that's
using it for other
interesting.
things?
That's interesting because it's my understanding that the council has used the contingency fund for other things. So,
Yes.
for instance, if a nonprofit wants to use a city facility and wants
Absolutely,
to
we
have,
have. We were told we could
pay
only
their
use it
fees.
for events by someone who was in your job before you. So if we can use it more broadly, that's fine. But I do think it's important that and I know some other agencies do it differently, that the donation is recognized from the city, not from the individual members.
Absolutely.
I don't think that's what the county and some others do. So, or do you think not?
So my thought on this is it's really a matter of whether there is a public purpose that's being served by these funds.
Yes.
You know, the city is essentially setting aside these funds and saying, you know, as long as there is a public purpose being served. I think it'd be very legitimate for the council to say in advance as part of the policy, one of the types of uses is to help defray or pay the cost of a facility use fee that the city
Sure.
would otherwise collect if it's for a certain type of organization,
Right.
whether it's a nonprofit. I don't think we'd want to use it for political organizations or candidates, but for a nonprofit, I think that would be a legitimate public purpose that
Or
the
another
council
government
could determine.
agency, a legislative purpose,
Correct.
whatever it may be.
Correct.
I think it is very appropriate to have this capacity, particularly when we've got nonprofits that are needing to pay municipal fees, and this becomes an opportunity for an organization that's not in a position to pay that fee to have it paid, but through a council member's contingency fund.
So I would just be interested in hearing kind of the universe, and not, you can tell me offline as well, the universe of types of things that you can think the council's been solicited to use these contingency funds, and then I can incorporate those into the policy. That was one example of a type of use that, other than event, that I've been asked about. And so.
I can give you a couple right off. We were asked, Councilmember Roberts and I, to waive or to use contingency funds for a fee for the demonstration building that was in the baby pit. And I think it was a few $100s that was associated with that. And that was where it was a public art exhibition that was going to take place. Another example, Desert AIDS Project, holding an event for which there was a inspection fee that was necessary. It's those types of, the broad public is invited, it's being conducted by a nonprofit. There is an opportunity for Palm Springs residents to benefit.
So those are the types of things that I think the council could include in their policy and kind of pre-bless as a category, so.
Okay, great. Is that good?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Number 4, discussion and update regarding public integrity matters. And we'll take all A, B, and C.
Well, I'll start off on training sessions. So the last time I discussed this with you, I said that we wanted to do 2 sessions a year, one in September, October timeframe on soft skills, and then a second one in March on the Form 700 and other regulations on public disclosures. Had some difficulty finding a trainer, but thanks to City Attorney Ballinger, Christy Hogan, who is a member of BB&K, has agreed to serve as our trainer.
Okay.
And the general idea of the session is going to be tying in a commissioner's role to the mission statement, as well as the conduct of board and commission meetings, how to solicit public comment, how to, when you have intense issues, how to address that. So she's going to give this kind of broad overview of the role of the commissioner. And the date we're looking at is December 2nd.
Okay.
Interesting. One thing to think about, I think with obviously new council members coming in, and it's a smaller training, but thinking about a training when folks start, other than learning how to use the voting machine, because a lot of folks don't, yes, they'll go to the new training, that the league does, where they'll get some basics on Brown Acts and things like that, but just a little bit about, city departments, a little different kind of training. I think coming in new and, being involved, and Lisa was even more involved, it was okay, but for someone who hasn't been, it's a challenge. So I think just bringing new folks in, going through what the various departments do, what has to go through the city manager, instead of these one-offs where people then feel, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I think would be really helpful for folks. It wasn't helpful for me.
And one thing that I'm working on and going to flesh out more with the city manager is a new council member orientation that will involve IT discussing what support they provide to the council members, planning and engineering, providing updates, time with the city manager, time with the clerk to talk about clerk stuff, time with city attorney, that as well. And then also to give you an update on training is as new board and commissioners are getting appointed, starting this week, what we're doing is I'm meeting with them for 45 minutes to go over the basics of the Brown Act, Form 700, and our public integrity disclosure before they take their oath of office so that they're aware of all these issues.
Very good.
Great, thank you.
That all sounds great.
Do you have anything else?
No.
Mr. Mallon?
I know I usually like to spend a little time with new council members when they're elected. After they're elected, I've got a presentation that I usually go over with them about an hour and a half or so. So I'd ask for that opportunity when they get elected.
Right.
Terrific, thank you.
That formalizing of the onboarding process is really helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Discussion of any potential training sessions?
We just did that one.
I think we did.
City attorney report, anything you haven't shared?
Still learning.
Okay.
Okay. Social media policy.
So we have a draft of several policies. One is a social media policy, which is more kind of outward looking for city officials and employees. For your purposes, it deals with things like, if you have a Twitter account, you can't block people just because they say things you don't like. We also have an IT policy that is more inward facing, and that deals with things like, appropriate and inappropriate use of city provided technology. And we also have a San Jose policy, which is really more focused on the Public Records Act issues as they pertain to electronic communications, whether they be email or text. So we've got those three policies in a draft form. We're getting ready to set up a meeting with IT, City Attorney's Office, City Manager's Office to go over those drafts, and then we can provide them to the subcommittee, and then subcommittee can make a recommendation to the City Council.
And I think one thing as we look at sort of communication policy, when we're emailing and things like that, people will use our public emails for non-public purposes. So what the appropriate response to that is, we probably all respond differently, but moving it to our personal email, sort of how we handle those things, and vice versa, right? Like, just as part of the orientation, right? We now know because we've discussed it. If I get something on my personal email that's city business, but sometimes it's both. So what the best way to do that? Do you delete the personal part? If it's political, do you delete it, or do you forward the whole thing? So that kind of information would be helpful.
Those will be in the San Jose policy.
That would be really helpful, thank you.
And just as an update, there was a bill that was pending in the legislature dealing with electronic communications. It has passed both houses, and so it's awaiting the governor's signature. It would essentially say that electronic communications need to be kept for 2 years if they pertain to public business. So it's good in the sense that it provides kind of a bright line rule for the cities. It's also going to be a lot of records out there that are going to have to be gone through if we get a PRA request. So,
Mr.
Just briefly in the San Jose policy, thank you very much, because that was something that the Supreme Court decision had just come out as we were working through the task force, so it was included. But if, Anthony, as you're meeting with the new board and commission members, I assume all of the board and commissioner members now have this ABM email address, at least access to it. There's a complication with this, I think, still being worked out with Aaron, is that if you put it on your phone, then you have to delete all of your other things. So it's a little bit complicated. Most of us are using both of them. Like if I'm not home, I can't, and I want to do it, I need to get the thing. But it's just sort of a reminder is that either, forward it to your ABM or copy it. And that's what I do if I'm getting an email. I'm not at home, so, I just copy it. So that's something also to remind the board and commissioners, because that will be, they'll probably, be mostly using their personal emails, so just remind them of the new ABM, email address that they'll have, so they copy that, because I think that's something that people are not really doing, to be perfectly honest with you, the board and commissioner level.
Moving on, privacy policy.
So at the last subcommittee meeting, this privacy policy was kind of fleshed out in terms of what its purpose was. What it had to do with video or audio recording capabilities within City Hall by city employees and city officials. I reported to the committee that we would find out where the previous city attorney was with it. I contacted him. He basically didn't have any information to share, so our office will be preparing it. I've spoken to one of our labor and employment attorneys in our office to kind of flesh out where this all came from and what the goals of the city are. So I hope to have that in the near future.
Great. Thank you.
Is there anything else? We are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thank you.